wormholes, particle physics, extra dimensions. Are the wonders of so-called reality really what they appear to be? Or do we exist in an elaborate hologram? Is our universe the result of random activity or the result of intelligent design? If a creator was involved, can we discover him through our perception of divine order? This is Into the Multiverse with Josh Peck.
Holy mountains. What are they? Why are they important? And why haven't we been taught this in church? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. With me in studio, of course, my lovely, beautiful wife, Christina Peck. How are you, sweetheart?
I'm good. How are you?
I am fantastic.
Good.
And in studio with us again for the second week, Derek P. Gilbert, author of, I want to make sure I keep looking at my paper. I should have this memorized by now. I think this is like the sixth
Put in
show.
Big type.
Yeah,
That's what I always do.
The Great Inception, Satan's Psyops from Eden to Armageddon. An absolutely fantastic book, and I think vital for Christians and even non-Christians today, because we're all in this war together. We're never told that. Now, this might be somebody's first time watching the show. If so, where can they find us?
You can find us here on YouTube at youtube.com/intothemultiverse, or you can go to skywatchtv.com. You can scroll down. You'll find a banner of Josh and I, and you can click on it, and it will bring you right here to YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And if you have a Roku, you can check us out on Roku under the Skywatch TV channel.
Yes, make sure you subscribe. It's very important. You'll have access to past, present, future episodes and some really cool stuff that we'll have in the very near future. I want to start off asking a question that probably would sound like it should be the last question I ask. But I want to start this off because I think it's important. This information, and then we're going to talk about holy mountains and a lot of those things, but the information in your book, why should Christians care about this?
Well, to me, it seems relatively obvious. We're living in a world where our souls, our future, is the object, the goal, the mission objective, if you will, of a group of very angry supernatural entities who want to kill us and everything that we love.
Right.
Don't you want to know everything you can about that kind of an entity that's that angry at you? We're essentially on a battlefield surrounded by an enemy that we've been told doesn't even exist. And so to me, this is just wanting to know the enemy, wanting to know what we're up against.
Absolutely.
And it to me, as a husband and a father, I want to know, what am I protecting my wife against? What am I protecting my daughter against? I mean, according to the Bible, that's my role as spiritual head of my household.
Yeah.
What am I doing? What am I fighting against here? And how do I fight them?
Absolutely. And what if there are some people out there that might be watching this and thinking, well, I go through my day-to-day life. I don't see demons, or I don't have any extraordinary things happen. How do I know that these entities are so angry with me, when I don't experience them?
There's a wonderful line that's quoted in the film The Usual Suspects. It's written by Baudelaire from a short story that he wrote. And it is the greatest trick the devil ever pulled is convincing the world he doesn't exist. You don't see the enemy because they don't want you to see them. Talk to a missionary who's come back from Africa about how real the supernatural realm is and the impact of the spirit realm on people and their everyday lives. We talked to Reverend Robert Bennett about that, and his startling paradigm-shifting experience when he got to Madagascar. And on his very first day, found a woman falling at his feet, frothing at the mouth and screaming. Like, what's going on? Oh, she's possessed. Oh, does this happen often? He, like us, raised in a Western scientistic culture. We tend to believe that if we can't see it or measure it or quantify it, or observe it, perform experiments on it, it doesn't exist.
That's right.
Which is a crazy worldview.
Yeah, it really is.
When you think about it, I mean, how do you quantify or witness or observe or measure a thought or an emotion? So we know that these things exist that we can't measure, that we can't see, that we can't use science to perform experiments on, and yet we declare that if we as humans can't perceive it with our natural senses, it doesn't exist.
Right.
By definition, that would make us, gods.
And of course, if the enemy of humanity is leaving you alone, That's a problem.
Yeah.
You're right where they want you to be, and
Right.
why would we want to be there?
Yeah. Well, the supernatural realm exists, and we've talked about that on Skywatch TV many times. Science is beginning to recognize that the supernatural realm exists.
Oh, yeah.
Quantum physics is getting into all kinds of weird things that indicate the existence of realms that exist beyond our perception. The Bible has been telling us this all along. But since about the time of Augustine in the 5th century, there has been an effort to de-supernaturalize the Bible.
Yeah.
At least in terms of the existence of these other lesser gods, these old gods of the pagan world around ancient Israel. Molech, Chemosh, Dagon, Baal, Asherah. You go back to the Sumerian pantheon, the Anunnaki, Enlil and Enki and Anu and Inanna and Ishkur and all of these other pagan gods. The point of the book is that these things are real. The Bible tells us that they're real. They're called gods in the Bible. God calls them gods in the Bible.
Yeah.
So why are we so insistent that using the word gods, plural, is somehow sacrilege?
Right.
I mean, God calls them gods. We're
Yeah.
on pretty safe territory here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so why do we deny their existence? Why don't we want to find out what they're capable of, what their mission is, what their goals are, and what limits there are to their abilities and powers? How do we fight back?
And it's true. It's right there in the Ten Commandments. The second one, thou shalt not have any other gods before me.
Yeah.
It's right there.
So of course, if they don't exist, why would he
Then-
even bother to say anything at all?
Right.
Yeah, in Exodus 12, where God is telling Moses that tonight when God sends the destroyer to take the firstborn of all the Egyptian families, he's also going to execute judgments on all of the gods of Egypt.
Right.
So again, why would God put that in the Bible if it were just imaginary?
Right.
These are just lifeless blocks of stone and wood or whatever, these carved idols. I'm more powerful than they are, and I'm going to execute judgment.
It's like, oh wow, big deal.
As Mike Kaiser said, that's like saying I'm more powerful than SpongeBob SquarePants. It's not. It doesn't make any sense. These entities are real. They are hostile, and yet they are subject to the power of Yahweh, to the power of God, and that we as believers need not fear them. We need to be aware of their existence and their abilities. But again, they are not more powerful than the one in whom we've placed our trust.
That's right. And speaking of the Anunnaki, we've heard that term on the History Channel, like on Ancient Aliens and stuff like that. Can you tell us a relationship between the Anunnaki and what took place on Mount Hermon?
I would suggest that those are the entities that came down at Mount Hermon. In fact, there is a scholar, well-known and very well-respected scholar of ancient Near Eastern literature and history, Edward Lipinski, Belgian scholar, who 40 years ago wrote a paper on the abode of El. Now, El was the chief Canaanite deity, but that name was also the word that became sort of the generic term for God in the Bible.
Elohim.
Yes, exactly. It's the root word for Elohim. And that was the name by which God, Yahweh, identified himself to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. El Shaddai. It wasn't until Moses that he became, I am that I am. But in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest existing copy, which dates back to the old Babylonian period, that kingdom founded by those Amorites, it's about 1800 BC or thereabouts, Gilgamesh had to go off to find, or decided to make a name for himself by going off to the cedar forest and killing its guardian, Humbaba. And he found it in Hermon and Lebanon, according to the text, which was the secret dwelling of the Anunnaki. Now, Lipinski takes that further to argue that Mount Hermon was where El had his mount of assembly. That's where El lived with the 70 B'nai Elohim, 70 sons of El, which I would argue is why, besides, of course, that's where the Watchers came down. So you got the Watchers who came down there and committed their sin of taking human women, producing the Nephilim, teaching mankind secret knowledge we weren't supposed to have, but also as the dwelling place of El. That's why Jesus went to Mount Hermon for the Transfiguration.
Right.
That's where at the foot of Mount Hermon, Peter had his declaration of faith, right in front of the Grotto of Pan. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, on this rock. And now think about this. Was he maybe pointing at Mount Hermon?
Right.
9,000 foot elevation.
Yeah.
2 miles high almost. On this rock I will build my church. And the gates of
Wow.
hell, the grotto of Pan. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. And it's amazing how much of this information was known to scholars, known to the pagan world, and is not ever brought into church. Bashan, the land of Bashan, the kingdom of Og, defeated by Moses, we talked about last week. The Bible tells us that Og's kingdom was at Ashtaroth and Edrei. Those were two cities in that region. That's where, that's where he rules. There is a Canaanite text from the kingdom, the city-state of Ugarit, where a god called Rapaiuma, which is basically, it's based on the same root word as the Rephaim. Rapaiuma, the king of eternity, rules at Ashtaroth and Edrei, the king of the underworld.
Oh, wow. And
Jesus didn't pick Mount Hermon for these incidents by chance.
Right.
And you'll notice in Luke 10, it's immediately after descending the mountain from the Transfiguration that Jesus sends out 70 disciples throughout Galilee. The mountain where El lived with his 70 sons, Jesus comes down, sends out the 70. It's not a coincidence.
Wow.
The Bible is filled with messages from God to the spirit realm and those rebellious gods like that.
Yeah, it drives all of Scripture. The Babylonian flood account, is that an example of a psyop, and what's going on there? All that and more right after this.
I will ascend into heaven. The war began in Eden when the dragon, known as Nakash, lured Adam and Eve into sinning with the lie, "Ye shall be as gods." I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. Soon, humans multiplied upon the earth, and rather than worship God, they fell down at the feet of dragons. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation. But it wasn't enough for the dragons. They wanted to do more than just own mankind. They wanted to destroy them, to forever keep them from re-entering the divine council. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. The war raged on, where fallen angels descended onto mountaintops, spreading fear and false doctrine. It is a war for the souls of men, and only a Savior's blood could change the outcome. I will be like the Most High. Satan and his minions go by many names and wear many faces, but their strategy has always been to imitate God's truth. We call this war for men's minds the Great Inception. Learn the secret history of the spiritual war. Learn the names of the deceivers and what their true aims really are. Learn where they have struck and where they will strike again before it's too late. The Great Inception.
We're in the middle of a battlefield surrounded by an enemy that we've been told doesn't even exist. The pagan gods are imaginary, we've been taught, just lifeless blocks of wood and stone. The Great Inception shatters that illusion. It took me 2 years to pull this information together, research into archaeology, history, ancient languages, to show that the Bible stories you've known since childhood are actually literal accounts of supernatural warfare between God and the rebel gods who decided to reject the authority of their creator. My hope is that after reading The Great Inception, you come away with just one question. Why haven't we heard this in church before?
You've been fighting in a war against an enemy you've been told doesn't even exist. Skywatch TV wants to change that to prepare you for the battles ahead. Beginning March 7th, exclusively from Skywatch TV, the Cosmic War Collection finally arrives. Featuring 3 groundbreaking books, a 5-hour DVD, and a 7-hour audio series showing you how real the supernatural War of Kingdoms actually is. Reversing Hermon by acclaimed Bible and ancient language scholar Dr. Michael S. Heiser, and The Great Inception by Skywatch TV's Derek P. Gilbert. You'll learn how Christ's full mission has been misunderstood for 2,000 years. Not only did he come to shed his blood to redeem mankind, Jesus was on a mission to reverse the sin of the angelic watchers who descended on Mount Hermon. You'll also discover how Bible stories you've known since childhood were literal battles in the spirit realm between God and the gods who rebelled. When you order the Cosmic War Collection from Skywatch TV, you'll receive Reversing Hermon by Dr. Michael S. Heiser, The Great Inception by Derek P. Gilbert, a new, exclusive, never-before-offered deluxe hardcover collector's edition of the Book of Enoch. The Real Clash of the Titans DVD, a special, never-before-released video compilation with 5 hours of teaching on the long war between God and the gods. And The Unseen Adversary, a brand new audio series on MP3 disc with 7 hours of Derek P. Gilbert interviewing Dr. Michael Heiser on the Watchers, UFOs, and the Great Cosmic Rebellion of Satanic Forces. A value of more than $100, yours for just $29.95. The Cosmic War Collection, available beginning March 7th only from Skywatch TV. Know your enemy. Order the Cosmic War Collection beginning March 7th by calling 844-750-4985 or log on to skywatchtvstore.com.
Welcome back to Into the Multiverse. I, of course, am Josh Peck, your host. If you haven't had a chance to do so, make sure you subscribe. There's a little subscribe button in the lower bottom corner of your screen if you're viewing this on YouTube right now. All you got to do is click on it, and then you're subscribed. You have access to all past, present, and future episodes, plus some really cool stuff we have coming in the near future. I say this a lot, and I've noticed it, but it's always the case. I want to jump right back into this. The Babylonian flood epic or myth or story, however we want to call it. How is that an example of a psyop?
Well, it basically reverses the roles of the chief god and the so-called crafty god in the story. The Bible tells us that God sent the flood because mankind had become thoroughly corrupt. Mankind's heart was just totally wicked, and God had to start over.
Yeah.
In the Babylonian account, the chief god Enlil, who was the closest thing in Mesopotamian cosmology to Yahweh as the chief god. First of all, in the Bible, mankind was created at God's pleasure.
Right.
He wanted to create mankind to populate the earth, to serve as his imagers, his divine agents, basically, on earth.
Which is a huge honor. I mean,
it is.
Yes.
Yeah. One that we don't really understand fully. We don't accept that responsibility as we should. But in the Babylonian account, the Mesopotamian cosmology, humanity was created to essentially work as slaves for the lesser gods who got tired of doing all the work for the major gods, the Anunnaki, the Enlil and Anu and Enki and Inanna and Utu, the sun god, and Nana, the moon god. They were lazy, so they made the lesser gods do all the work, and the lesser gods got tired of it, so they created humanity to work as slaves.
Yay!
But we were apparently noisy, really noisy, creating a ruckus so much that the chief god Enlil couldn't sleep.
Funny they didn't see that coming.
Yeah. That's another key difference between the pagan gods and Yahweh. None of those pagan gods is omnipotent.
Right.
Not even Zeus in the Greek pantheon. Zeus, Jupiter, they could be foiled by other gods.
And that also speaks to how these weren't just made up things. If you're going to make up a god, you're going to make it the most powerful thing ever, right?
Right.
I mean, unless we're talking about the actual real God, but that just shows that these fallen beings, these fallen gods, exist.
They had weaknesses.
Yes, alone among the cosmologies of the ancient world, the God of the Hebrews was the only one who was the creator of all things, who existed outside of space and time. None of the other ancient cosmologies. And this is something that these skeptics who say that Jesus was just copied from these other dying and rising. Yahweh was just a storm god that they added some other stuff to. No, he is different, fundamentally different.
Yeah.
But back to point, the chief god Enlil decided he was going to commit genocide because he was tired of being kept awake at night by humanity. And so the crafty god Enki, whose name is a compound word meaning Lord of the Earth, the one whose temple was the Abzu, the house of the Abzu, house of the Abyss.
Oh, wow.
At the city of Eridu.
Sounds similar to Abaddon.
Yes, exactly. And I would argue that there's a good case to be made for identifying them, perhaps. Anyway, Enki, who was ordered by, all the gods were ordered, don't tell the humans I'm about to kill them all, send this massive flood. Well, Enki, being clever, went and talked to a wall, which the Noah character in the story just happened to be standing on the other side of. Oh, wall, if I were you, I would build a boat and put everything. So he didn't technically break Enlil's command, but Utnapishtim, he goes by different names, Atrahasis, Zia Sudra, there are different names for this character, but Utnapishtim builds his little boat, puts everything he loves, his family and the animals, on the boat, and they survive. Well, Enlil is furious. He's going to smite them and kill them, but Utnapishtim sacrifices and shows, thank you for not killing us all. And so Enlil relents, and but what it does is it makes the god of the earth, the Lord of the God of this world, Satan, the good guy, by saving mankind from the judgment of this vengeful, genocidal, psychotic mass murderer, Enlil, the chief god, who was supposed to be like, that is a psychological operation.
Yeah. Wow.
The Mesopotamians were told, the chief god wants to kill you. It's the god of the abyss who loves you. He's also, in Mesopotamian cosmology, the one who sent the gifts of civilization to mankind, the Apkallu, who were actually the Watchers. So, it basically inverts the relationship between God and the enemy in the minds of humans.
Well, that was at the Tower of Babel too, because Nimrod even told them that, God's going to come back and he's going to finish you off. That same.
Is that from Jasher?
Jasher.
Right.
It was in Book of Jasher. Their history book in the Bible, what they quoted from many times, that God is still angry with you. He's going to come back. He's going to finish you off. So we need to kill him before he kills us.
It does say like a third of them wanted to go up and kill God with arrows. So that shows what kind of view they had.
But in secular history, we found there's a poem, and I think there's good reason to suggest, and I get into this in the book, The Great Inception, that we can identify Nimrod as the Sumerian king Enmerkar, who's listed on the Sumerian king list. Enmerkar, again, another compound word. En means Lord, Kar means hunter.
Oh,
Ooh,
wow.
yes.
Mighty
before the
hunter,
Lord.
yeah.
Yes.
Second generation after the flood, just like Nimrod. Center of his kingdom was Uruk, just like Nimrod. And there's this poem, Enmerkar and the Lord of Arada, remembers a time when this king Enmerkar, Nimrod, put the screws to a neighboring kingdom for building materials to rebuild this temple to Enki at Eridu, the temple of the abyss. Why would he do it? According to the poem, he wants to build it as a holy mountain, as a shining mountain, as the abode of the gods. He wanted to create an artificial holy mountain, the abode of the gods, just like the abode of the gods at Mount Hermon, the abode of the gods at Eden. He wanted to create an artificial right above the abyss. And for whatever reason, we can only speculate, but Yahweh decided that needed to stop. The funny thing is, as scholars who excavated the site in 1949 found, again, this is the oldest and the largest ziggurat in Mesopotamia, larger than the Temple of Marduk, larger than the temple at Ur for the sun god. The 18th and largest level was never completed. And the scholars who excavated the site said it seems that for some reason the site was suddenly and completely abandoned. Read Genesis 10. They left off building the city when God confused the languages.
Wow.
Secular history, secular archaeology confirms the account in the Bible.
That's amazing. So in ancient history, there's this common theme all throughout those Near Eastern cultures about holy mountains. And do you think that these holy mountains are still active today? Do you think they're still being used either by God or by lesser fallen beings in any way? Or have things changed?
We can only speculate. I don't know that for sure. I do know, and I think there's good reason to believe this, that the activity is now focused on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem.
Oh, okay.
The Temple Mount, which was Mount Zion back in the day. Now, the name was changed in the 1st century AD. They renamed the Western Hill in Jerusalem, which is a little taller, Zion. But the Temple Mount, the reason there is so much anger and violence and hatred directed over who gets to control the mount and what might happen to the mount. Will there be a third temple on the mount? Which, of course, would require moving the Al-Aqsa Mosque and out of the way. Why it's all focused on that mount? Because that is where God is declared in the Bible, is where he will reign forever. That is his mount of assembly, his mount of congregation. That is it right there. That's where Armageddon will be fought. In the book of Revelation, scholars have thought for years Armageddon is going to be fought at Megiddo.
Right.
That's based on a mistransliteration of the Greek into the Hebrew and then into English. I won't get into the logistics of it, but essentially the term in Hebrew should be Har Moed, which means Mount of Assembly. Har Moed is rather than Armageddon, which is how a lot of scholars traditionally have mistranslated it, misinterpreted it. Har Moed makes more sense. In the Old Testament, the apocalyptic battles of the end times are fought at Jerusalem.
Right.
Well, that's where Mount Zion is. There is no mountain at Megiddo. It's a valley.
Right.
So it's a little problematic to say we're going to fight this at Mount Megiddo. There's no mountain there. I mean, it would seem to make sense because some very famous battles in history have been fought there. But the final battle is going to be fought for control of God's holy mountain, Mount Zion. And I would argue that the reason there's so much anger, so much hatred, so much political activity that centers on who gets to control the mountain, Mount Zion, is because that is the mountain that is active, and that's the prize. That is the that is the goal. You know, all the spiritual marbles will be fought for that particular mountain.
With all of this, why don't you think we hear all this information in church?
Well, that's hard to answer. I think partly because the enemy has been effective in getting his teachings out of seminary.
Right.
Most pastors coming out of seminary, most priests coming out of seminary in the Roman Catholic Church, they aren't taught this. And pastors who are curious about this stuff take on a lot of roles that don't give them the time to dig into papers and scholarly books. The scholars who do have the time to do this are typically secular, and they're not looking at this as a spiritual truth, a spiritual reality. They look at it as a window into the psyche of the ancient people. You know, it's an example of.
So they're even stripping out all the supernatural.
Right,
Of it
they're looking at it as literature, you know, or psychology. They're not really looking at this as for clues into what's happening in the spiritual realm, the supernatural realm. So it's not that. I wouldn't go so far as to say there's a conspiracy on the part of people in the church who are trying to serve God to avoid this information.
Right.
I would say that the enemy, the spirit realm, getting back to my earlier comment, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled, is to try to put us to sleep. God is just there as a life coach. You'll be happier if you just live this way. Be nice to everybody. That's all you need to know.
Yeah.
And we're all on the same path to the same. We're just all following God in our own way, regardless of what God we say we believe in. We're all, again, that's a lie. That is a classic example of the psyop. There are pastors out there who are getting this, but sometimes it takes breaking out of the boundaries that are placed on them by their denomination.
Yeah.
And they have to be cognizant of, if I start teaching this stuff, you know, this radical Heiser and this non-scholar Gilbert, what does he know? That they might be putting their advancement within the denomination in jeopardy. So I'm thinking that mainly it's just because they've never been taught this in the seminary, because we just have not been teaching this since about the time of Augustine.
Right. Well, and that's why we said in the show that it's not even that this is the best book on the topic. This is the only book. You know, this book and Michael Heiser's book, it's the only books on this topic, and it's so vitally important for Christians today to get a hold of. Well, Derek, I can't thank you enough for being in the studio with us and talking with us about your book. These past couple episodes have been amazing. Always good talking to you.
Thank you. It's my honor.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us into the Multiverse. As always, take care and God bless.